Thank you very much. It is a great honor for me to be here this evening. I'm especially very happy to see so many people turn out to hear me speak on South Africa this evening, especially at a time when I know that most minds in America are on the Middle East. South Africa is in the throes of change. We who live in South Africa face the prospect of a new constitution and a new society. Last year, on 2nd of February, de Klerk, the President of South Africa, announced what may be regarded as the historic changes in South Africa, unbanning the African National Congress and the Pan-African Congress. This sent great joy to all those who are oppressed who live in South Africa, and even hopes of peace throughout the international community. This was followed on the 11th of February by the release of my father, Nelson Mandela. And truly, for many of us in South Africa, it seemed that peace flags were about to flutter. It seemed that the end to our misery, to our frustration and pain was at an end. Yet the events of that same day in the afternoon indicated something different in South Africa. People were tear-gassed, shot, some killed in Cape Town. In Transvaal, the same thing happened. People in peaceful demonstration celebrating the release of one of their leaders were also tear-gassed, sjamboked, and detained. Many of us were surprised and a little bit confused. In one breath, de Klerk was indicating to us and to the whole world that he was a new face to the history of South Africa, that he was serious about changes. And yet, on the other hand, some elements of his government continued the same brutal and harsh measures against peaceful demonstrations in the country. Even today, there are many people in South Africa still being detained, locked away in jail, without any court cases being held. Young children, adults, old people. Not a single black person who lives in South Africa has been left unaffected, directly or indirectly, by apartheid laws and policies in South Africa. We have no doubt in our minds that de Klerk is serious about change, that the changes that have been instituted in South Africa since 2nd of February last year are irreversible. But when one looks at the average man on the street in South Africa, when one looks at their conditions of life, even today, one at times wonder where these changes are leading us. Since, as of today, there has not been any significant change in the life, in the condition of average black people who live in South Africa. From the cradle to the grave, we are still subjected to the apartheid laws and policies. These have not been scrapped in South Africa. This year, de Klerk issued a statement of intent that soon they would scrap the Land Areas Act, the Group Areas Act, and the Population Registration Act in South Africa. These acts are still in place in South Africa, and they are the fundamental pillars of the apartheid system in South Africa. A parliamentary vote, according to de Klerk, is going to decide whether South Africa repeals these laws or still keeps them. As far as we blacks in South Africa are concerned, we are not interested in parliamentary votes. We would like these laws to be dismantled, not tomorrow, not next year or in 5 years' time, but immediately, because we have felt the intensity of these atrocious laws. If you are born today in South Africa, you are born as a slave in the country of your birth, with no freedom of choice, of speech, of movement. The laws of the country in which we live decide at birth where you are going to live, which neighborhoods you are going to grow up in, which schools, hospitals, or areas you are going to work. Because the Group Areas Act, as I've said, and the Population Registration Act and the Land Act in South Africa are still in place even today. From the moment of birth as a black child, your future has already been determined by the racist laws and the racist government that rules South Africa today. In South Africa, at this moment, there are even separate cemeteries, separate burial places for all the ethnic groups who live in South Africa. While this, my parents told me that whatever differences people have, at the point of death, they bury their differences. It has not been so up till now with those whites who rule South Africa. They still take their hate of the black man to the grave. This is indicated by the different cemeteries that exist in South Africa today. Many children who are born and grow up in South Africa today do not enjoy the luxury of growing up under the care of their parents, both mother and father. As I've said, and I want to repeat and emphasize this evening, the Group Areas Act, which restrict and curtail the movement of blacks within the country, are still in place. Many of the African people who live in South Africa are required by South Africa's laws to live in the so-called African states, homelands, or so-called independent states, where soil erosion and overworking of the soil make it impossible for African people to live off the land. Many of these Africans who live in these so-called homelands have to look for work in white cities. They cannot, out of free choice and free will, just decide that in the morning they will pack their baggage and move into South Africa's so-called white cities. They have to have the appropriate documents. This has not changed in South Africa, even though South Africa says it has scrapped the pass laws, because people who live in these so-called African homelands still have to carry a document when they go into South Africa, because they are declared as illegal aliens in South Africa, and only aliens in their respective African homelands. Most men who live in these areas are recruited to work in the gold or diamond mines of South Africa. The Group Areas Act prevents them from bringing their children and their wives to their places of employment. Many of these men are required to live in what are called male compounds, in single-sex hostels. They are bunched into one room, crowded in 6, 7, or up to 12 people sleep in one room. Many of these men have defied the laws of South Africa and have decided to bring their wives and their children to the white cities of South Africa. In fact, when these gold and diamond mines were discovered in South Africa and black labor was recruited from the so-called African homelands, there were no black townships in South Africa. There were only these male compounds, single-sex hostels. So when these miners or migrant workers brought their wives to the cities, it created a problem for the South African government, because they did not want to provide any housing for blacks in South African so-called white cities. They wanted to keep the races totally separate. However, they were at a loss what to do, because they needed this black cheap labor, and they couldn't send these men back to their so-called African homelands. They could not also use what taxpayers' money to build housing for African people. What they decided to do was, through a proclamation act, allow the local governments to build liquor stores, African beer halls, so that out of these, the profit that will be generated out of these would be used for African amenities. What happened or resulted out of that is that black locations were built in places like Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban. And next to all the bus stations and train stations in these black townships, you would find a liquor store or an African beer hall, so that they could provide amenities for African people. In their minds, African people had to consume enough liquor to generate profit so that they could build housing for them, schools, hospitals, clinics for them. My own opinion is that no nation can ever be built on liquor. The intention of the government was not to build or provide amenities for blacks, but it was to drag down the black nation to the gutters. The Group Areas Act does not only prevent these male migrant workers from bringing their wives and children to the white cities, but also prevent the mothers who work as domestic servants in white suburbs in South Africa. Over 80% of African women in South Africa work as domestic servants. They have no education or no skills to get a better job. These women also have to be recruited to work as domestic workers in the white suburbs. They are required by the laws of South Africa to sign an undertaking that they will not, under any circumstances, bring their children to their places of employment. As far as the white racist regime in South Africa is concerned, the African labor force in South Africa, whether composed of men or women, must not be burdened with the superfluous appendages such as wives or children. Even if the children are seriously sick and at the point of death, that mother, that parent who works as a domestic servant cannot bring her child to the city where the child has every chance to get medical treatment, because the Group Areas Act prevents her from doing so. In fact, for many years in South Africa, there have been some white employers who have been sympathetic to the plight, to the condition of the African people and their servants, and have allowed them to bring their children to their places of employment and have helped them with schooling or bringing up the children. However, 3 years ago, the government has made it difficult for these white employers. If an illegal person is found in their premises, that illegal person will be detained, fined a certain amount of money, and that white employer will be fined a sum of 1,000 rands, which is equivalent to $500. As far as the South African government is concerned, black family life is not important. The Group Areas Act, as it exists today in South Africa, has separated the African family and contributed to dismantling the basic fabric of the African community, which is the family. Husband separated from wife and children, or mother separated from children. Many of these African mothers are forced to leave their children at a tender age when they need their mother's loving care and tender care. They either leave them with elder siblings, relatives, neighbors, or grandparents. That this contributes to the Act as it exists in South Africa today. a friend of mine who works as a social worker in one of the local colored hospitals in Durban, experienced the negative effects of the Population Registration Act on a young infant and an African mother. One afternoon, he was called to the outpatients department at the Children's Hospital to identify the race of a fair-skinned infant who was brought in by 2 ambulance drivers. They explained to the social worker that this infant had been abandoned near one of the local post offices near Pinetown. The social worker, with the 2 ambulance drivers, a hospital clerk, and a nurse, stood together for some time, examining this infant's hair, features, and exact coloring of her skin, as well as deciding on a possible name and a surname for her. My friend says she did not contribute too much to this discussion because she felt very frustrated at the very exercise of determining an unknown infant's race. After some time, they came to the conclusion that this young infant was colored by birth, that is, a child of mixed race, and so it was appropriate for her to be admitted in this colored hospital. If this child had been found to be African or Indian, my friend would have been required by the laws of South Africa to send this child to an African or Indian hospital. She then took this infant to be examined by a medical practitioner. She remained in the room while the medical practitioner examined this infant. After a few minutes, the medical practitioner became apprehensive. He explained that this infant was premature by birth and had to be placed immediately in an incubator. The infant died an hour later. My friend has up to now felt guilty that they had delayed the immediate admission of this young infant by an unnecessary procedure and discussion on her racial identity. That same week, an African mom came to her office in the company of a 1-year-old son named Ernest. He was also fair-skinned in color, colored by birth. The reputed father was said to be a Scotsman, a white man. She came to make a request, which is not peculiar in South Africa's circumstances, to ask the social worker to look for a suitable colored home for young Ernest, since she believed that young Ernest would be rejected in the African community into which he was born. And she felt the inevitable separation between her and her son would be easier, while at least her son was still young. My friend promised to work on the case. After a month, young Ernest's mom came back to the office. This time she explained to the social worker that she had been released from jail on bail and that Ernest needed immediate placement either in an adoptive home or in the hospital. She went on further to explain that a scuffle had broken out between her and one of her neighbors, who had been taunting her for a very long time about the color of her son's skin. And accidentally, she had stabbed her neighbor to death. Young Ernest was admitted into one of the local wards. When he was placed in one of the courts, he was laughing, happy, playing about in the court. He did not understand then what was happening to him. But when his mom moved away and turned for the last time to wave goodbye, only then did young Ernest that realize that his mother was leaving him. He cried, he pounced his little fist on the pillow, tried to climb out of the cot. But my friend was helpless to give him back his mother. His mother was subsequently sentenced to 7 years imprisonment, this time for defending the color of his son's skin. If the demands of the Population Registration Act had been non-existent in South Africa, that premature infant would not have lost her life. Young Ernest would not have been separated from his mother and from the African community into which he was born, and hence his roots. Neither would his mother suffer 7 years imprisonment. How treacherous South Africa's Population Registration Act has been to young, fair-skinned Ernest and to many who are born who are like him in South Africa today. We black people who live in South Africa experience apartheid to be brutalizing both physically and emotionally. These brutal and harsh conditions in which we 30 million blacks are forced to live in 13% of the land, while 87% of the land is occupied by 5 million whites, has aroused in us blacks feelings of hatred of everything that is an obstacle to our full and free citizenship and living and free and unhampered lifestyle in South Africa. Our complaints as blacks in South Africa is not that the 5 million whites who live in South Africa are rich and we 30 million blacks are poor, but that the laws that have been created in South Africa have been designated to preserve and perpetuate a situation where we remain poor and in starvation, and whites rich and living in luxury in South Africa. The de Klerk government has indicated that they are changing South Africa. Some of us have no doubts about this. However, I believe strongly that the scrapping of apartheid laws in South Africa in itself will be meaningless to many of us oppressed in South Africa if it is not accompanied by improvements in black housing, black education, health services, the economy in the black community. African education is the most inferior form of education ever provided for a group of people. While education in South Africa is compulsory and free for whites up till the age of 18, it is said to be compulsory for us blacks, but it is not free. We have to pay for school fees, school uniform, and school books. If your parents have money for school uniform and none to pay for fees and books, you do not get any education in South Africa. Our classrooms are always overcrowded. They are built out of very frugal structure, corrugated iron roof and cement on the floor. There are hardly any desks in most of the classrooms. We do not have any science laboratories or science equipment, no recreational facilities whatsoever. Most of our teachers, even at the high school level, do not have university degrees. They are unqualified, ill-equipped. From literature to history books, we black children are taught about how superior, intelligent whites are, how backward, uncivilized, uncultured we blacks are. In history, we are taught about the Great Trek. That is the movement of the Afrikaner moving away from British rule in search of new land and freedom. The history books tell us that while these Afrikaners were moving inland, they met the African people who were a menace and a burden to them by stealing their livestock. Yet these same history books provided for us African children do not tell us how these Afrikaners in South Africa got their livestock, since they had not brought any livestock from Europe. Perhaps they got the livestock from heaven as the chosen children of God. We have not found the answers as yet. The education offered African children is not only patently unequal, it is intellectually inferior. It is filtered through the white consciousness. While all amenities are provided for white children, none are provided for us in South Africa. Hence, today, there is a great shortage of black skilled labor in South Africa. South Africa, as it is today, has an impressive achievement in science and technology. But it must be pointed out that participation of blacks in this area is at best minimal. While South Africa represents the paradox of a highly developed industrialized society with massive black unemployment and underemployment and huge disparities amongst blacks and whites. The human resource gap today in South Africa is very wide and is a direct result of apartheid laws and policies. The government in South Africa continues even today to spend 10 times as much on white education than on black children. The result is both an absolute shortage of skilled and semi-skilled black participants to participate in the labor force today. The concentration of skills is in the white community of South Africa. In 1989, South Africa had only about 600 black physicians in the whole country and only 50 black dentists in the whole country. Of an estimated nearly 10,000 full-time scientific and medical researchers, 99% of those are white. White South Africans in South Africa, especially those with science and engineering degrees or qualifications, are emigrating out of South Africa at an alarming rate. And they are not being replaced by South Africa's university graduates, especially black graduates. While South Africa is experiencing the emigration in terms of science, technology, and research skills, it is doing nothing at all to improve black education in science, in technology, and many other areas to fill the gap in South Africa. Today, South Africa is in the process of irreversible change. Economists last year, December, projected that South Africa, devoid of apartheid, will experience a marked increase in economic, industrial, and scientific activities. Yet, many South Africans will not be able to fill those jobs. A new South Africa with black majority rule will require that we blacks take an active role in shaping the future of the South African society. And this includes that we have skills in all facets of the economy and society. Surely, we 30 million blacks in South Africa cannot claim to be free, even given political independence, when we are underrepresented in crucial sectors of the South African economy or society. The pre- and post-independence of many African countries with human resources investment strengthens the case I am trying to make here. The painful process of economic freedom in Africa has been made much more difficult by the severe shortage of skilled manpower and lack of participation of Africans in their own independent countries in the crucial areas of their economies. The question is, to what extent are we oppressed black South Africans going to participate in crucial sectors of the South African society in post-apartheid South Africa? As I indicated earlier, the participation of blacks in crucial areas such as science and technology and research is today less than 1%. I cannot see a greater level of black participation in the post-apartheid period. If the government does not do something now to improve black education in South Africa. The obstacles to attaining education in the crucial sectors of South Africa are enormous. As I've said, and I want to emphasize, our schools, both primary and secondary schools, are overcrowded, underfinanced, with mostly unqualified teachers. Home and neighborhood environments also add to school problems. Secondary schools and universities results are very poor. Last year's matric results or high school results were shocking. The failure rates among African children were horrifying. We already have amongst the African community a whole generation of kids that have not seen the inside of a classroom. The non-white or the black universities lack the staff, the facilities to teach many of the advanced science and engineering courses. Equally significant, only 1,000 black graduates make it out of university, 1,200 out of trade school each year in South Africa. These figures have not significantly improved in the atmosphere that prevails in South Africa. There is one bright spot, however, that there is a well-qualified pool of black South Africans in exile. And perhaps in the post-apartheid period, we can draw from this pool to help augment the scanty participation of blacks in the crucial sectors of the South African society. Finally, I am convinced that only greater mastery of blacks in terms of skills, science, technology, politics, the economy, can lead to genuine and lasting solutions to South Africans' problems as they exist today. Health facilities are also very inadequate in South Africa. Most of our hospitals are overcrowded. People forced to sleep on cement floors or on hospital verandas. The hospitals provided in the African homelands are shocking. With no medical supplies, no medical practitioners, nurses running whole hospitals. In fact, in one of my local hospitals in Transkei, Kofimbaba, there is only about 2 doctors who are black but not South Africans. They are Ugandans, responsible for a whole hospital. The hospital has some days when it runs out of medicines, pills, no linen to change the beds of patients. There are no diapers or even cloth napkins for babies who are sick or even newborn babies. It is so bad that even new mothers who have just given birth cannot be provided with sanitary napkins. They have to bring their own and bring diapers for their children, wash them, hang them in the hospital yard, and watch over them so that they not be stolen. No matter how sick these mothers are, they have to do that. A hospital is supposed to be a place that is clean, a model of cleanliness and hygiene, yet this hospital is filled with cockroaches. Many children born in the African homelands or in townships do not even get immunization. As I've said, many die of kwashiorkor and malnutrition. In Transkei, we still have a high rate of TB cases.